Hi, I'm Steve Adubato. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce for the first time with us on public broadcasting Dr. Alexander Mirescu, who is Assistant Professor of Political Science at St. Peter's University. How are you doing?
Very well. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
We should tell everyone we're in the fall of 2014, and you are, in fact, training for the New York City Marathon.
On a completely different note, yeah, that's true.
We're not talking about that right now.
Okay.
Can we talk about the fact that St. Peter's, partnering with the United Nations, initiative called Making Cities Resilient, a global campaign, doing what? And is this post-Hurricane Sandy because cities are not as resilient as we thought they were?
Yeah, well, certainly we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of Hurricane Sandy, October 2014. And one of the motivators behind this partnership or this initiative between St. Peter's and the United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNISDR is the name of the agency.
Right.
Really, one of the motivators is a lot of our students were directly affected through their experience of Hurricane Sandy. They knew people who lost houses, and they were coming from communities that had experienced flooding and high wind damage and storm surge. And so we had a body of students who were very receptive to understanding the effects of the storm, and then coupled with the fact that understanding resiliency, disaster mitigation, and preparedness is now really a global issue in development studies. And it's an area that's not just affecting the developing world, it's something that's affecting the developed world. I mean, we are getting hit by stronger and stronger storms, and there is a necessity for our world, which is becoming rapidly more urbanized. The world is living at no other point in time in history has human history lived in cities like today, and so there's a greater concentration economically and in terms of economics and people just being concentrated in cities. So we have to be prepared for these things.
But I'm curious about something.
Sure.
You and your colleagues, from an academic point of view, from a scholarly point of view, your students looking at this, how is this an issue for the rest of us? I mean, is this really an issue for all of us? Because I was looking at this, it said, we need to be better citizens of the world. What does that mean?
Ultimately, it means that when you say the rest of us, well, we all have a stake in good governance.
Even if someone doesn't live in Hoboken, which is a community that was hard hit, you actually have identified Hoboken, and you folks believe that they did a pretty good job at this. You know?
Hoboken is really one of the cutting-edge cities. Under Mayor Dawn Zimmer's leadership over the last few years, she has really highlighted Hoboken as the premier city that is dealing with what we call
What do they do that was so great?
They have engaged in a tremendous amount of urban planning that is multi-purpose, that seeks to, for example, redirect floodwaters into different basins. They have a much improved early warning system. They have essentially introduced
You mean post-Sandy?
Post-Sandy,
Got it.
Certainly. Like I said, Sandy is really the motivating moment for a lot of these changes, and it really exposed a lot of weakness and vulnerability. And Dawn Zimmer, as a very savvy public servant, realized not only that were her constituents very negatively affected by this, but there was a necessity to improve on the city's reaction, not only as a preparedness issue, but it's a public service. I mean, electricity, clean water, hospitals, schools, all these things were negatively affected, and they need to be strengthened. Their capacities need to be strengthened.
Going back to the issue of all of us being in this together, sure. Obviously the United Nations is involved. It's a global issue. I was thinking about this from a political science perspective. People who say, wait a minute, we elect public officials. It's their job to take care of this. Mm-hmm. It's not my job to be involved in this. That's a cynical attitude, isn't it?
It is a bit of well, we can debate on whether it's cynical or not.
Someone say, fix this. It's not my issue. I elected you. You fix it. Why doesn't that work?
Well, that passes the responsibility on, unfortunately, leaders today we would hope that they would be better versed in things like disaster preparedness, but in most cases they're not. And how was that revealed? I can give you really some very qualitative data on that. Last semester, I taught this fantastic course on disaster risk reduction. This was this partnering course we had with UNISDR.
At the United Nations?
No, well, it was paired with training at St. Peter's University, and then I brought my students to the Secretariat, and UNISDR then trained them on mechanisms of disaster risk.
Sure.
What they did then is they went out into the field. They went out to parts of Long Island, the Jersey Shore, other parts of the states of New York and New Jersey, and they directly engaged municipal leaders and asked them, would you like to learn more about disaster risk mechanisms? And if you would, they were advocating for this Making Cities Resilient campaign. It's a global campaign that the UN started a few years ago that seeks to create a community of practice, free information, whereby mayors throughout the world can dialogue and learn about mistakes in the past, they can do better in the future, lessons learned.
What did they find out?
They found out that there is a very disparate level of understanding.
Break that down, less from an academic point of view, more for the average person to understand. Disparate meaning? Disparate
meaning there are some communities that really understand what it means to engage in preparedness, and there are others that have no clue.
Based on what are the variables that dictated that? Closer to the water?
There are some variables that are geographic variables, that we have these natural vulnerabilities, being closer to, if you're a place on the Jersey Shore, you would imagine that risk and vulnerability are higher, and in fact for hurricanes they are. But would you imagine that, places like Bound Brook or
huge flood problems. Huge flood problems. Not as engaged.
Well, the engagement is increasing, and in fact, we're in Passaic, New Jersey, and one of my students successfully advocated Passaic to sign on to this campaign.
So the student got the leaders of Passaic to be more engaged than they otherwise might have.
Well, it was when we talk about advocacy. Advocacy is really just education in a different form. So my students, who were very well trained, in part in our class, but to really a greater extent by their working with the United Nations, that they were conversant in a set of vocabulary. They knew the mechanisms behind disaster risk, and they were offering free information, almost like as a public service to municipal leaders, and they were like, we need to know this. Yeah.
It's fascinating stuff. I know we only scratched the surface, but you're doing important work.
Thank you.
You're helping public officials help their constituents, and that is the role of a university, particularly post-Sandy when it has to do with making cities more resilient. Let's make sure you come back down the road and give us an update, okay?
I'd love that. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it.
Pleasure was mine.
Stay with us. We'll be right back right after this.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. Funding for this edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been provided by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, MagnaCare, Josh S. Weston, TD Bank, New Jersey Natural Gas, New Jersey Manufacturers, and by Fedway Associates. Promotional support provided by The Star Ledger, powering NJ.com, and by Commerce Magazine. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.